Welcome to the Scrum.org Community Podcast, a podcast from the home of Scrum. In this podcast, we feature professional Scrum trainers and other Scrum practitioners sharing their stories and experiences to help learn from the experience of others. We hope you enjoy this episode.
Hello and welcome to the Scrum.org Community Podcast. I'm your host, Dave West, CEO here at Scrum.org. Today's podcast, I'm really excited about it, not just because of the topic, but also because we've got a fellow Brit on the podcast. But we're talking to Helen Swift from Simplyhealth, a UK-based health solutions provider based in the United Kingdom. And she's going to be sharing with us her Scrum and Kanban journey. Welcome to the podcast, Helen.
Hello and welcome.
Great to have you here from sunny England. Before we start on the actual content, let's talk a little bit about yourself. So please tell our listeners a little bit about yourself and where you're speaking to us from, Helen.
Yeah, so I'm Helen Swift and I'm speaking from the UK, as you mentioned. I'm in the lovely Andover in Hampshire. And yeah, and it's a lovely sunny day at the moment, which has been rarely.
No, my experience since I moved to the United States, England has suddenly become a lot more sunny, and I don't know if they're linked. I hopefully not. But and Andover is a beautiful part of the world. Okay, all right. So let's jump straight in. So tell me a little bit about Simplyhealth's Agile journey, and then we can start talking a little bit more about Kanban.
Yeah. So initially we used to work waterfall, so it was very traditional, very project led. I would say this was some time ago now, probably 8 years ago, and that still continued to a certain extent. We slowly started to move into the world of Agile and starting to appreciate the benefits of working Agile. And very recently we've become more product led. So really focusing on the product and not just that whole typical, we're running a project, it's going to run for 2 years, 3 years, however it may be. And whether we're happy with the results at the end of that 2 or 3 years, I mean, it's hard to say, isn't it? Whereas the Agile way of working really focuses on the kind of the short bursts of work. So we get to a certain point. Are we happy? Are we confident with what we've got, what we've achieved? If we're not, then let's start again. Let's tweak it maybe, and let's kind of move forward. So yeah, that's pretty much where our journey started and how we've progressed. But I'm pleased to say that the Agile way of working has definitely supported us. It's helped to improve our way of working for sure.
And so you were predominantly using Scrum. You transitioned slowly from waterfall to a sort of Scrum-based approach. And those Scrum teams now increasingly are aligned to the products that Simplyhealth provides, right?
Yeah, so it's all about benefiting our customers and getting value from our projects. So that's our goal.
Yeah, and so by aligning those teams with clear, good product goals connected to the customer in those sort of product areas, you can improve that cycle.
Absolutely.
Okay, so you're using Scrum, you're aligning your product teams. So what brought you to Kanban? What happened? What happened that sort of brought you to this different, complementary, we would argue, way of working, Helen?
Yeah, so we were working both Kanban and Scrum, dependent on the teams. We've got a lot of teams in our department, a lot of Scrum teams. But what we were finding is that specifically, we weren't able to complete, in many cases, the tickets in our sprint. So I'm sure this is quite common for many different companies have experienced this. We'd plan all our work in, we'd be running our sprints, and then we would find at the end of the sprint that we would have multiple tickets that would move into the next sprint. So I wanted to look for a way to reduce those amount of tickets that would move across. And what I found was that with the benefits of Kanban, where you've got the better visualization of the board and the reduced work in progress, is that the focus was more on the completion of the tickets, which was really what was missing when we were working sprints. So we would continue on with our work. The devs would bring, I say devs, it should be the development team members, because I'm including the testers with that as well. They would bring tickets onto the board. They would come into in progress. They'd work on them, and they might be blocked, or for some reason they would bring in another ticket. So then you'd find that more and more tickets were piling up in progress, and that was what we found. We'd come to the end of the sprint and we'd have so many tickets in progress, but fewer tickets actually completed. So looking at that, I thought, what can we do? I can see the benefits of Kanban in other teams, as I mentioned, the visualization of the board, the reduction in work in progress. But having the planning really helped us as well, having the sprint goals. So we were aligned into that product goal. So I was doing a bit of research, come across Scrum.org's PSK training, and I thought, that sounds like it could work for us. And it progressed from there, really.
That sounds awesome. It is interesting that, in a sprint, it's so easy to get so focused on just doing the work, pulling more stuff from the backlog, etc. And even though you are effectively working towards a sprint goal, you can become quite inefficient inside the sprint, and pull up too much work, etc. And that sounds like something that happened to you all. So you learned a little bit about Kanban, started using it. How did it help? Was it really that it reduced the work in progress? You reduced the amount of tickets or issues or whatever that were leaving the sprint, as it were?
Yeah.
Those sort of things. Were they some of the benefits, Helen?
Yeah, so multiple benefits, really. We started working from right to left of the board, whereas initially we would work from left to right. We'd pull tickets in, and as I mentioned, a lot of those tickets would pile up then in progress. So working from right to left means our focus was very much on the testing, the end goal, the ready to deploy state. So our focus would be there, and if there were any tickets blocked, then we would jump on those tickets. And I think that's made one of the biggest differences. If we're unable to unblock a ticket, then we're unable to bring more tickets in. So it makes it much more important that we focus on getting that ticket unblocked. We also found that with a slight tweak to the board as well. So for example, our columns, they would be set up with a ready for test column. In some cases, previously, some time ago, we would have a blocked column. So those columns weren't really doing anything. They weren't active columns, so to speak. So it was difficult then to reduce your work in progress with those columns in place, because they were like a parking lot. So by removing those columns and focusing on just the 3 columns, really, which was to do, in progress, test, then we were able to have better visualization of the board, clearly see what was on the board, clearly see any blockers, and those tickets that focused on the sprint goal. So in that respect, it really helped. The other thing as well is identifying our aging tickets. So that was another tool I introduced, and we were able to see if a ticket's been in there for 7 days, for example, in a given sprint. Why is it still in that particular column? What can we do to help move that piece of work on? So there's been many benefits, to be honest. Other things as well, we've moved on to breaking down tickets into smaller tickets so that we can actually get those tickets through to completion, which is, again, what we were struggling with before. You bring in a huge ticket, chances are it's not going to get complete in a sprint, and then it moves on to the next one and potentially could move on again into subsequent sprints. So by really breaking those tickets down, that's absolutely helped.
That's awesome. My gosh, a lot of benefits there. I really there's a couple of things that stand out. One is around this sort of, it helped to get the whole team focused on, you talked about moving from right to left as opposed to left to right.
Yeah.
By getting the team all focused on that, you get things done, really.
Absolutely.
And getting that sort of visualization, simplifying the board, putting in more things that track how long things have been in progress, where, you know, sort of the in the class, there's this thing, the use of a banana, you know, the fact that you get this sort of aging thing, and like a banana skin gets browner the older it gets. I thought that was always, I can't help but now, every time I look at an issue in Jira, I'm like, oh, where's how brown is that banana? Which is interesting. And then, you know, the power of WIP, work in progress. I think it's funny though, as human beings, I don't know if you find this, Helen, that it makes us feel good when we're starting lots of things. It makes us feel like we're really busy and stuff.
Yeah.
But ultimately, the more things you have in progress, the less likely any of those things will finish. And I think there's loads of studies that show that. And using Kanban to effectively drive that is incredibly powerful. I think they're great messages.
Yeah, I mean, we definitely found that. What tended to happen was multiple tickets would be brought in. The developer would sit on multiple tickets, and then when the next developer went to grab a ticket, it wasn't necessarily the next prioritized ticket, because the previous developer was sat on multiple tickets. So then we weren't really focusing on the things that mattered the most. So it's really helped now, when we've kicked off a sprint, to not assign tickets to individuals either. It literally will be, they'll grab the top one in priority order, take that in, work on it, and only take 1 or 2 tickets in at most, and progress that right the way through before pulling another one in. Now, initially, one of the challenges I had back from one of the dev team members was, I can't pull any more tickets in, otherwise we'll impact our WIP limit. So what do I do? My response to that was just delve in, see if you can support another member of the team, see what you can do. If there's a blocker, help them unblock it, maybe pair programming, whatever you can do to really move that ticket along. Because at the end of the day, that's value to our customers, value to our business.
That's a great message. I think there's so much sort of individualism in industrial work practices, waterfall type practices, that we want, okay, so give me the ticket, I'll work on it. Well, I'm done and there's no more tickets, so I'm just going to sit here. When you've got 3 or 4 teammates sitting there going, you know, I'm busy, I'm far too busy, I'm stuck, I need some help, but they don't want to say that. And you end up, by making this explicit, you know, you can create that environment, and you get some side effects, like people learn stuff that they didn't know before. They build stronger relationships, there's increased amount of trust. And also sometimes it's nice to work with others, you know, sometimes. Yeah. So we are human beings. That's awesome. So Lindsay, you did talk a little bit about metrics for a second.
Yes.
What sort of metrics are you starting to use? The classic Kanban metrics like throughput, etc. Time.
It tends to be throughput. So we focus mainly on throughput, so the amount of tickets that are actually completed in each given sprint. So I have an average throughput for each of the teams, so we can understand roughly how much we're going to bring into the sprint during sprint planning. I've actually found that very, very helpful, because you can just look at your board, you can prep ahead. I generally prep about 2 sprints ahead with the teams, and we'll look at those tickets and think, okay, well, we've roughly got about 10, 11 in here, and if that's dependent on your average throughput, of course. So we can pull those in, or we can look to see if there's any that we may need to push out. What we don't want to do is overload our sprint. And that's something that's happened in the past. We've brought way too many tickets in, but having that, the ability to understand on average how many tickets we're likely to complete, i.e. our throughput, has really helped us.
Yeah, I think there is a propensity for I know I certainly do it, is to, my eyes are bigger than my belly, as it were. I think that's
Yes.
an English expression that I don't get to use very often, Helen, so I like to use that there. Or the Vegas buffet model, which is you run and you fill up this plate and you run off, and then at the end, you know, halfway through, you can't eat it all. You're like, oh dear, wish I hadn't taken that extra crab leg or something. So there is a sort of natural sort of desire to do that. By having that data, you can clearly encourage better practices around consumption.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
And it's a
which
gauge.
awesome.
You know, it's not perfect, but it's a good gauge to be able to let us know we complete about this amount each sprint. So let's pull that in, and that hopefully will help us to complete those tickets right the way through.
So tell me a little bit about the size of your stories or your tickets that come into your sprint. Are they all the same size? Are you using some right sizing, Helen?
Yeah. So yes, what we tend to do is keep our tickets broken down, and so they generally tend to be around a 5 and below. We don't bring anything in bigger than that. If it is bigger, we use the Fibonacci sequence, by the way, for story pointing. So for example, it was an 8, then we would look to break that down and bring it in a 5 or below. So whether that be a 1, 2, 3. We tend to do a similar thing with our 5s. We will look at a 5, and I will always say to the squad, could we, sorry, I say squad, we use the term squad and team just to make sure I don't confuse anyone. We will look at the 5 and say, can we break it down that little bit more? Because the smaller the ticket is, the easier it is to complete. So we make sure that there's a range of tickets coming in. We don't have a whole stack of 5s. There's generally some 1s in there, some 2s, and maybe a couple of 5s. So yeah, right sizing absolutely works, and that works with your throughput. What wouldn't work is if we brought in, I'll say our average throughput was 10, and we brought in 10 8s. I mean, the tickets are just too big to complete in a given sprint. It's just not going to work. So this I have found with the teams, it does work. So keeping those tickets smaller, keeping those numbers smaller, breaking down as much as we can. It's been a bit of a challenge at times. Initially, when we implemented this way of working, the teams would say, "Oh, we can't break it down any further." And I quite often got that response. And I would say, well, why? What's preventing us from doing that? Oh, because it's just, it is what it is. So, okay, so what could we do? So can we pull the analysis out of it and break that down? Maybe we can bring that in as a spike. What could we do? So when you start talking that through, we then come up with ways of, yeah, actually, let's try that. So ways of actually making it work for us. So there is generally a way of breaking a ticket down, and so it does make it more manageable.
And I also think that conversation in itself is incredibly useful as well.
Oh, so
we break
valuable.
this down, because things become bloated. There's a lot of assumptions that are made by everybody, and by making those assumptions very visible, by having that conversation, you discover that something that was maybe an 8 or bigger, is not, you don't have to have all that stuff. Some of it's a nice to have, some of it is additional, and we can actually make it a 2 or 3 and actually get the value that we were actually seeking. And the other stuff is something that we could put into a different ticket and have later. That's really, I think it's a really powerful message. So, all right, so we've adopted Kanban in your Scrum teams. We've got that visualization, WIP limit. You're starting to break work down. You're driving a more effective process because of that. You're delivering more stuff. You're getting to done. So what's next, Helen? What's next for you all?
What is next? Well, very recently, we moved over to what I would say proper story pointing. Initially, we were working in hours, which days, I should say, rather, which I'm sure other companies do the same thing, and I'm sure they have the same struggles with story pointing. So that's something we have recently changed, and I feel that's made the world of difference, because it's taken the pressure off of our dev team members, because they would be looking at a ticket. They'd say, well, we think it's 2 days work, but we can't say for sure. And that ticket would be brought in, and it may be that it's going on and going on. We're into day 3, we're into day 4, and then they're really struggling. And then you get that pressure of then, but we said it was going to be 2 days, and the business thinks it's going to be 2 days, and we're not going to get this delivered. So really wanted to move away from that approach and move on to proper story pointing, where we're actually looking at that piece of work, and we're thinking of it in not just the amount of time, i.e. the effort involved, but also the consideration of risk involved in that ticket, the complexity that goes with it as well. So that's something we've done recently, and we have adopted across the business, which has really helped. So we're nicely aligned there. The other thing that I would like to work on, which is in some of our teams, there is a very much a mix of dev and test. And quite often you will find that developers, they develop, the testers, they test. So it's ensuring that we maximize our time within the sprint as much as possible. We're doing everything we can, again, to get those tickets through. So my focus really is, what can we do to get some of our dev team members testing as well? I mean, it could be that the testers would write up the test scripts, and so they do the prep, and then the devs can actually start looking at that and supporting our testers a bit more, because we do have more devs than we do testers. So we've got a bit of an imbalance there. Again, I think that's quite common as well. So it's just finding a way, other ways to progress that work on. Other things as well we're focusing on is automation, which will obviously make a big difference as well. That will reduce a lot of the manual testing. So again, so that's another key focus right now for our teams.
That sounds awesome. I have to say, if you ever want test automation to happen, the best way of getting it to happen is to hand over testing to developers, because the last thing they want to do is testing, and the first, so they instantly they build a robot to do it instantly. So, and by partnering them up and pairing them with testers, you end up with the best of both worlds. You end up with that real high quality output in a very efficient and effective way, even though at the start it feels very inefficient often, because you're like, well, I'm just much better at this. If you just wait, well, hang on a minute, are you? Yeah, so it's an interesting thing. So it sounds like lots of exciting things on the horizon for Simplyhealth and your work there. That sounds awesome. So thank you for today. We've reached our time box, which is obviously very important in Scrum. So we try to keep to that. So thank you for sharing your journey with us, Helen. It's been really, really interesting. Really appreciate you taking the time out of the day to get on this podcast today.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's been lovely.
Okay, everybody. Today on the Scrum.org community podcast, we had Helen Swift from Simplyhealth, a UK-based health solution provider. And Helen shared with us her journey around the use of Scrum with Kanban. Look, you know, many people think that you're either a Scrum camp or a Kanban camp, but I think what Helen showed today was the two work perfectly together. And when you use these two approaches together, you end up having the best of both worlds. So it's definitely worth something exploring. Thanks for listening today. This is your host, Dave West, here on the Scrum.org community podcast, wishing you a great day and Scrum on. Bye-bye.